So 6 o'clock, I'll declare the meeting open. Gala Kadich Wajuk Mort, KN Kadak, Nija Walyalap Buja, where Jinang Wajuk Kadijin, where Niching Bula Yeye. We acknowledge the Wajak people as the traditional owners of the Greater Fremantle Walyalap area and recognise that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still important today. On the committee tonight, we have on my left side Councillors Sullivan, Lorver, Groom, Lang, Graham, and Mayor Fitzharding. I'm Councillor Jones, the chair. On this side of the room, we have Councillors Kamada and Archibald, who are observers, so they're entitled to speak but not to vote. And then we have various officers assisting the committee. There are no attendance, there are no apologies or leaves of absence. Any disclosures of interest by members? There are none. Responses to previous questions taken on notice? There are none. There is a public question time, which is for members of the gallery to ask questions on items which are not on tonight's agenda. Anybody in that category? Okay, petitions? No petitions. Deputations, presentations, confirmation of minutes. So I'll move the minutes of the Planning Committee of the 1st of February 2023. Got a seconder? Councillor Lorver. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Any elected member communication? Okay, so we'll move on to reports and recommendations. Given the amount of interest, I'll take item 2 first. Now, I'll just advise people the meeting is recorded and live streamed. The people outside of this room can hear your voice, but they can't see your picture. So the camera points this way, but they can hear your voice. Just prior to taking any presentations on this, there are a couple of items of information have come in too late to be included in the agenda, and they may be relevant to what people want to say in their presentations. So I'll just deal with that first. The first is advice from the Heritage Council, which arrived this afternoon, looking at the revised proposal. Essentially, it says the same things as they did for the previous proposal. The place is of interest to the Heritage Council and is on its assessment programme with a draft assessment that identifies its cultural heritage significance. The Heritage Council has considered the revised proposal in the context of the draft identified cultural heritage significance of the Ford Motor Company factory and reiterates its previous comments of the 8th of July 2022 for consideration by JDAP in its determination. The place is a rare and intact example of a large-scale, purpose-built Ford factory in the interwar functionalist style with simple geometric shapes, asymmetrical massing and steel-framed windows. The proposal is for redevelopment and adaptation of the site to create a mixed-use precinct with residential, community and commercial uses. Adaptive reuse of this place can be achieved without the loss of significant fabric. As currently proposed, the extent of demolition across the buildings on site, in particular the rear of the administration building, the workshop building and the internal fabric of the office building, is excessive, unnecessary and detrimental to the cultural heritage significance of the place. Limited demolition could be considered to support the adaptive reuse and activation of the place. The Heritage Council strongly encourages the preparation of a demolition plan indicating the full extent of demolition be provided to JDAP. So that was received today, and that will now become part of the documents for the meeting. And the director has had some late information from Main Roads, which I'll ask him to summarise, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was literally about half an hour ago. We had some additional advice from Main Roads WA on 130 Stirling Highway. They're still putting their formal advice to us. They've had insufficient time to fully consider it in advance of this meeting, but we'll have that ready for the JDAP meeting. A very brief summary: they will be looking for a condition of approval should a planning approval be considered at JDAP, looking for a deed between the state government and the developer for a contribution for future road improvements, and this is to the Stirling and McCabe Streets, and not the Coventry, which is more of a secondary road. That will include various land acquisitions to enable the road improvements to proceed. Overall, that infrastructure improvements, service relocations, land acquisitions could be anything between $10 and $20 million. They'll be looking for developer contributions based on development yield, and that could be anything from $750 to $2 million for this particular development. Further work will be done on this in time for the JDAP meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee on those items? Councillor Lang.
Just through the chair for the Director of Planning, note the discussions we're having with Main Roads on this, and it was raised in the last meeting. Contributions towards road widening, significant, $20 million. Has there been any conversation in parallel with PTA about activation of a train station in the McCabe Street precinct?
Through the chair, nothing formal. There's been various conversations with PTA over many years about whether or not another railway station is reinstated. There is nothing on the table at this point in time. And of course, from a Main Roads perspective and a regional roads perspective, it's about maintaining the capacity of the Stirling Highway as it is. So that is where any development improvements for capacity go back into McCabe Street for change. I haven't seen any plans or any detail on that costing. As I said, Main Roads are struggling for time to get that in place. That was a quick update for tonight. We'll see more in the next 2 weeks.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Groom? Oh, sorry. Get your lights on. Councillor Lang, sorry. No further questions? Okay, we'll move to members of the public. I'll just remind you, you have 3 minutes to speak. You'll hear an alarm with about 20 seconds to go. We'd ask you to wind up at that point. 3 minutes is quite a long time to make out a case. We would ask you not to repeat things that have been said previously. You can simply agree with them and reiterate them by all means, but there's no need to repeat them at length. We have quite a lot of people to get through. I'll take them in the order they came in. I don't have any other order being given to me. And the first one is Ray House. So we have 3 minutes starting now. Thank you. And
thank you.
You need to be fairly close to the microphone. I'll tell you if it's...
Thank you. My name is Ray House. My wife and I live on the corner of Thompson Road and Foundry Court in North Fremantle. Our house is about 400 metres from the proposed development. It's the first house on the left as Thompson Road turns from Coventry Parade. We resided there for about 21 years, and so I have knowledge of the history of Matilda Bay development plans in that time. I've written a submission with respect to the revised proposal. I do not intend to go over the details of my objections in that submission. However, whichever way you look at this latest proposal, there is a gross overreach. Height, plot ratio, traffic, parking, built heritage, to name some. And the developer has ignored or paid lip service to the guidelines and protocols in these areas. The plans show no respect for local built environment in the neighbourhood, does not attempt to add to the character of Fremantle. It's ugly and adds nothing to the community. The only beneficiary is the developer and their profit. Secondly, the proposed development on this site and the adjacent One Steel site will see about an extra 2,000 people living there. That means a 50% increase in North Fremantle's population, all entering and exiting at one intersection that is not designed to cater for such volumes. Traffic and parking chaos will be the result, and local residents will be left with the pain. The recommendations from the City's Planning Department for refusal has the support of all local residents with whom I've had contact. I ask that the Council's representatives on the JDAP to support a refusal. To do otherwise will be a betrayal of all Fremantle people. Thank you.
Any questions from the speaker? No, thank you. The next speaker, Terry Buller.
I live in this area at the Taskers development, and I wish to see the development of 130 Stirling Highway, the Matilda Bay Brewery site or Ford Motor Company, along with other proposed developments close by, which we all know about, but I want to see them in fitting with the aesthetics of the North Fremantle coastal community. This development proposal submitted doesn't fit this description, and to this point does nothing to meet the most basic of considerations, which should be to ensure the proposed structures blend with the surrounding environment. The so-called height policy of 8 stories maximum in the area has been shoved aside by this proposal. Why have such a policy if it's frequently disregarded by developers and the decision makers for approvals? When a bridge is built, engineers do their detailed assessments of all variables before the building commences. Why then is there not full evidence that the road infrastructure is capable of sustaining the significant population increase within such a small geographical area? This should be the first step in the process, not the last, and not done on a wing and a prayer. The development wouldn't be considered if sewage and all other necessary amenities were not given the consideration required, and the detailed written plans and guarantees that they would all work. Yet, the equally important, if not more so, consideration of traffic flow seems to get scant regard and nothing to show that it will work. Using roundabout sounds great, said quickly. However, take a look at the roundabouts around the suburbs which become clogged quickly with no escape. Eric Street, Railway Street Crush is just one example, and it recently took 10 minutes to move 250 metres there. Roundabouts won't solve the obvious traffic flow issues that will impact if this development is approved on its current scale. There has not been enough evidence provided to prove up the traffic flow, particularly when one considers not just 130 Stirling Highway, but 140, the One Steel development or proposed development, Sarai at 21 McCabe Street with 3 8-storey towers, and the latest proposal for an 8-storey tower at 15 McCabe Street, right next to the Siskers building in the Tasker development. In summary, the most basic considerations from even a layman's viewpoint have not been given due consideration, and all parties involved need to exercise their duty of care to ensure that sound, attractive, sustainable development occurs at this and other sites. Road infrastructure must be proven up before any consideration can be given to this and similar proposals nearby to this one. And just, if I have time, just in a final aside, and I was having a look this afternoon, but I noticed that a lot of the information provided by the developers seems to show a lot of the plans for the buildings either side on, going up about 6 or 8 stories, or from above, but not too many showing the full height and the full impact that this development will have on the environment or on
Thank
the
you.
area.
Any questions from the speaker? Thank you. The next speaker, Ingrid Ma. 3 minutes starting now. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm speaking in support of the officer's recommendation for refusal of the proposed development at 130 Stirling Highway. I'd like to respectfully request that the Planning Committee support the officer's recommendation to the JDAP as an outcome of the meeting tonight. As you're aware, in making good planning decisions on applications seeking to vary the planning framework, it's necessary to consider whether it would be consistent with orderly and proper planning, and whether the amenity of a locality will be adversely affected by a development proposed. As clearly articulated in the RA, the proposal does not meet the relevant matters to be considered under Clause 67 of the deemed provisions, does not meet the discretionary criteria for building height under Local Planning Policy 3.11, does not meet the design objectives of the former Matilda Bay Brewery structure plan, does not provide substantial community benefit, does not integrate well with the surrounding area, with the landscape and built form, is inconsistent with the established character of the area, and will have a significant adverse impact on the amenity of the locality, in terms of bulk, scale, height, overshadowing, loss of heritage fabric on Coventry Parade, car parking, traffic and access. In addition, there is no precedent that I'm aware of which varies the planning framework so greatly with a proposal with such disregard for a planning framework of such scale and intensity in a similar location outside a town centre or near a train station, which it is not, that has been approved. And I would hate to think the precedent that would be set if this application was approved and we get similar types of cowboy proposals in any location. For these reasons, I feel it's quite clear an approval of this application would be inconsistent with the principles of orderly and proper planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the speaker? No, thank you. Martin Grounds.
Good evening. I'm here to support the officer's recommendation, but I want to focus up on one aspect of this development. In the agenda for tonight's Planning Committee meeting, the summary of the amended development proposals by Three Oceans, there is mention of the factory assembly building, the demolition of the sawtooth roof building, and what will be inside the factory. However, there is no mention that the southern factory facade along Coventry Parade is shown as shortened by another 13 metres from the 17 metres proposed in the first submission, making a total of 30 metres proposed to be demolished. The entire existing 87 plus metres of southern factory facade along Coventry Parade is as much a landmark and integral part of North Fremantle's residential fabric as the dingo on the flour mill and the red container cranes on North Mall. What is achieved by demolishing 30 metres of the facade that has well recognised North Fremantle heritage significance? We get a very ordinary angled open pedestrian entry into the central courtyard of the new development, with rain pouring off some awnings and the tower block above. The pedestrian entry could have been designed to go through the existing factory facade as an exciting and adaptive use of the facade, as good a heritage design demands. The other reason for demolishing the east end of the factory facade is, of course, that some of it, not the southernmost wall, conflicts with the placement of Tower 2, and so significant heritage facade is being replaced with an 18-storey tower block when again creative adaptive design could have been employed. The Three Oceans heritage architect Stephen Carrick's idea that demolishing sawtooth roofing and reflecting what was there in pavings and wall patterns, as well as the demolition of 30 metres of factory facade, all under the buzz phrase, it's a contemporary response, whatever that means, is laughable if it was not so seriously disastrous for the project's outcome. Dynamic design opportunity is being lost by this development of the factory facade. However, my point to the design committee is that from my reading of the city's RAR, the 30-metre extent of demolition of the southern factory facade at the east end of Coventry Parade is essentially not mentioned in the RAR, and I'm requesting that the City of Fremantle's representatives on the DAP panel need to put forward that local residents object strongly to this 30 metres of visually gorgeous industrial architecture being demolished for zero community gain.
Thank you. Any questions of the speaker? I'll ask the planning officer if they're able to comment on that. So you're suggesting there's more demolition in version 2 than there was in version 1?
100%.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll come back to that later. We'll take another speaker first. Thank you. Jerry McGill.
Thanks, Chairman. My statement rather than question turns to what this is all about and what our roles and responsibilities are in it. I don't tire of reminding people that the mission of the JDAP is stated to enhance planning expertise in decision making by improving the balance between technical advice and local knowledge. In standing here to support the recommendation that this application be refused, I profess little of the planning expertise that's provided here by the Council's own experts in the form of the RAR, the Responsible Authority Report, which I note in passing that the Council never was and still isn't the responsible authority, and even less so with the recent trashing of the planning system by the McGowan government. What I do possess, though, is abundant local knowledge as a North Fremantle resident of 50 years standing, former City Councillor, current convener of the NFCA. In my local role, I can justly claim to have my finger on the pulse of the community, and I can testify that that pulse is beating fast in opposition to this proposal and also the One Steel structure plan. It'll be a travesty if this application is now approved in the face of the comprehensive analysis of its failure to comply with every one of the relevant planning policies and in the face of almost universal community rejection. If planning policies developed over decades are to be set aside, truly we have planning anarchy. The notion that policies and the communities express desires for their own town do not survive the test of time is highly questionable. By that test, the Ten Commandments, now 2,000 years old, must surely be no longer any guide to a virtuous life. The following concerning the stated objectives for the area back in 2001 is cited in the One Steel structure plan, and it encapsulates this line of thinking about, they're out of date. Especially surrounding the local planning area of North Fremantle, therefore little regard has been given to the local planning provisions and objectives of the North Fremantle under the 2001 strategy in the preparation of this PSP. But those objectives, as they are expressed there, are as timeless as the aforementioned commandments. They are values. They are the values the community holds dear and seek to have respected. In addition to trashing these old-fashioned values, the community is referred to sneeringly as just a bunch of NIMBYs. This stands with McGowan's Antichrist jibe as an insult to the communities he and you are elected to serve. Approached in the right spirit, communities can be harnessed to the cause of urban intensification. Alien towers are not the answer. Building communities in cooperation with their citizens is the answer. So as someone once said, it's time. So why don't we start here by clearing the slate and getting rid of this proposed, well, both of them. These, I hesitate to use words that may offend the developers, but I think they know what I think about them. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any questions of the speaker? Thank you. Next speaker is Ken Adam.
Good evening, all. First up, I'll say that as a retired architect and a town planning and urban design consultant, I'm absolutely appalled personally and professionally by the development that you're being asked to approve. I think the planning officers are to be commended for a very thorough and comprehensive and professional report. If anything, it's less critical than it might have been. The application should be refused outright. It's far too seriously flawed, and we've heard from preceding speakers a whole catalogue of shortcomings in this development. It's far too seriously flawed to tinker with it. It can't be fixed up. It really is a question of going back to the drawing board. I would remind councillors, that's exactly what happened with the Leighton development, by the way. It had got to this kind of a stage, and until some independent thinking people and some residents pointed out how flawed it was, and they took it right back to the drawing board, and the end result is remarkably better. I endorse absolutely what Martin Grounds had to say about the heritage aspects of this building. The factory building is a remarkable example of its kind. We don't have any others like it. And I realise that creative and adaptive work on that building would test the qualities and imagination and skills of architects. It's a real challenge, and I think they might be daunted by it and would find it a lot easier to demolish the building and do something different. But that is an aspect of this which really must be faced, and a wonderful, unique opportunity presents itself here. Yes, challenging, but surely the architects, certainly there are architects in this state who are capable of meeting that challenge. The others have spoken about what effectively amounts to the critical nature of connection to or sitting happily with place. I mean, it's fundamental to this development. The architectural forms and the spatial character of this development proposed are absolutely alien to the character and the grain of North Fremantle, both its existing grain and pattern of development and what has clearly been expressed as its desirable future. Very significant thinking about this development needs to go on. There is, I might say, it represents a style of development that's been consistently failing people in various parts of the world ever since the 1960s.
You draw to a close, please. You've had 3 minutes. If you could wind up, thanks.
I'll wind up by saying there's absolutely no place here for tower buildings sitting on plinths or so-called plazas. That treatment, as I've said, is absolutely alien to the character sought for the locality. It's already been said, all of it, I guess, that I've said in different ways by other people. I support so strongly the voices of those who come before me and urge the council as using as powerful a voice as it can to get this development refused. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? The next speaker is Anne Former.
Thank you. I'd like to support the officer's recommendation for refusal. In 2015, the North Fremantle community accepted the increased heights in the LPP 3.11, but the current proposal far exceeds anything that we understood to be the ground rules for this development. I could talk about many issues: traffic, consequences for properties of road widening on Stirling Highway, affordable housing, diversity of housing types, but I'm going to comment on the first principle of SPP 7, design of the built environment, which says, good design responds to and enhances the distinctive characteristics of an area, contributing to a sense of place. Unfortunately, the development is unresponsive either to the surrounding built environment or, just as importantly, to me, the natural environment. The overwhelming scale is well illustrated by the mock-ups in your agenda on pages 45 and 46. What is that character in North Fremantle? There are many types of houses, but there are many timber and stone homes on small lots in narrow streets built in the era of a horse and cart. They're human-scale buildings in friendly streets. The height of the buildings that go with these kind of neighbourhoods does matter. Chapter 21 of the architecture book, A Pattern Language, is titled 4-Story Limit, and that chapter details the detrimental effects high-rise housing has on the mental and social well-being of families. Paris, Barcelona and Amsterdam have managed to be fascinating cities with complex spaces with a dense but not too high footprint and a lot of diversity. Density doesn't have to be tower blocks. And what about the sense of place in our natural environment? This site is the gateway to Fremantle and North Fremantle, and an important feature of that natural environment are the limestone hills, Buckland Hill, Cypress Hill, Cantonment Hill. Travelling from the north, the natural gateway to Fremantle starts as you head up and over the crest of the hill from Wellington Street lights, and you then see the panoramic vista of Leighton Beach, the port, and the mouth of the Swan River. The encircling hills known as the Seven Sisters, including the highest, Buckland Hill, have outstanding European and Aboriginal heritage significance that is well documented. Many of the hills have been quarried, but the stone symbolises the heritage of Fremantle being used in the construction of the port and countless other heritage buildings. So the character of North Fremantle is defined by these hills encircling the suburb, and when it existed as a separate municipality, it included the whole Buckland Hill area. They mark in landscape terms the end of Fremantle, the change in character between Fremantle and the western suburbs, and therefore, to preserve the character of this area, the hills need to retain their primacy in the landscape. I did a little bit of looking at contours, and by my workings, if this development is allowed, the landscape, let alone the heritage building, will be overwhelmed. The tallest building will be 27 metres higher than the top of Buckland Hill. And to me, it's a travesty to allow buildings of this height to become the defining feature of not only North Fremantle, but Fremantle. We cannot allow this development to create a precedent for our future.
Thank you. Any questions? And the next speaker is Sue Savage.
I support refusal. I've been a resident for over 27 years, and I agree with Ray, Terry, Ingrid, Jerry, Ken and Anne about exceeding height limits massively. The traffic management, I reiterate, it will cause chaos, major safety issues. I'm just cutting all this down now. An updated traffic impact assessment is essential, and more detail for pedestrian traffic, etc. The sustainability, lack of public open space to grassed areas for people, to play only the token handkerchief pocket where zero escapes is currently. There's no positive environmental or social outcomes. The only grassed public open space available is at SEW Park on the corner of Foundry and Thompson. And we have many people from locals far and wide using that small park. The lack of parking, which other people have mentioned, is only maybe just enough for the residents, but no allowance for the parking for the tavern, the reception centre, the restaurant and the offices. The developer must abide by the current local structure and planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Is it Loz Copley? Sorry, that's been crossed out.
I thought I'd just start by reading from the Fremantle Plan 1.2. The policy is intended to help ensure that new buildings developed in the area do not adversely affect the visual amenity of the locality in general or the amenity of occupiers of nearby residential properties. That is a really important point. In particular, the policy is intended to help safeguard important views from publicly accessible viewpoints towards and over the Indian Ocean and the Swan River, and the setting of existing buildings and landscape features of cultural heritage significance. I'm sure you all know that. What I'm wanting to know is, who are the developers here tonight? Are there representatives here? Nobody's here. I thought they would be, because I thought they might care. Because I was just imagine, and I'm not one of them, that you are on Salastri Place, Foundry Court, somewhere nearby. You've been there as people who have already spoken. You've been there for 20, 30, 40 years. And then suddenly this monolithic structure goes up into the sky above you, and everybody's looking down into your backyard and looking at everything you do. Your amenity as a citizen, as a ratepayer of the council, disappears. And I think that is, I'm quite glad I'm not there. I've got a place on Corkhill. I've actually owned a place in Tacona in Taskers. But it's just horrific. And the value of their properties, which is probably all they have, will plummet. So we've got greedy developers who want to make money at any cost. You as a council have to make sure that you're doing the right thing by ratepayers, refuse as much as possible, and I wish you luck, because it seems to me that McGowan is development at any cost, and I'm a Labor voter. So there you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? And the final speaker I have here is David Webber.
Yeah, good day. So the traffic issue, I don't know how you're going to, I'm speaking in favour of rejection. The traffic issue, I don't know how it's going to be possible to resolve that up there, but there has been a thought bubble that the train station at Leighton could be reawakened, but we did hear at a previous meeting in North Fremantle from an expert that that was nigh on impossible because of its proximity to North Fremantle train station. So I suspect that the people that will be living in these towers would have cars, like a lot of people in WA do, and there seems to be a heritage building up there, so I can't see how that could be resolved. So in theory, it'd be great, you know, Leighton train station, but we've been told it couldn't happen. With high rise, there's costs to the community. One is more rubbish. People who are in high rise is rubbish on the. I mean, I've just picked it up around every high rise building in Perth from time to time. You just see it, and it's the residents who are walking around who have to pick it up. That might seem as a small issue to some people, but it is a serious issue. And while the McGowan government stated grand purpose is to give people places to live, it seems to me that the closer you are to the water in a high rise, the more likely it's going to be attractive to Airbnb moguls. I don't think that the council would be able to take effective measures to prevent that. We've seen it in the eastern states that these measures tend to fail. People in Brisbane are being moved out of, long-term renters are being moved out of a high rise because they've said, oh, we need more short-term accommodation there. There's an Airbnb project that's happening in Leighton. It's a building that is devoted to Airbnb and short-term accommodation, which seems to me to be ridiculous at a time when we have people looking for places to live. There just aren't enough places to live. So we've got a high rise. Are homemakers going to live there, or are people that are going to pay for the weekend to watch the sunset? And that's not community building. That has a big impact on the local community for a whole range of reasons. Also, if we're going to have an outlet down the bottom, we don't need another nightclub or liquor outlet. And let's face it, they're the places that make money these days. We have more alcohol outlets per head of population in North Fremantle than anywhere in Western Australia from my own personal research. And I think that what the council needs to do right now, and it might be a futile exercise come in 2 or 3 or 5 years with the plans that Bulldozer McGowan has for the state, to take a stand for sensible development. There could be smaller, closer to the ground developments there, might not make the developers as much money, but I think that that would be better for the amenity, for community, and that's what we're really going to lose with these high-rise proposals.
Yeah, any questions? Okay, before we move into committee, I'll just make a couple of comments for the benefit of people who've spoken. If you've registered to speak, the officers will contact you about the JDAP meeting. The JDAP meeting is here. You are allowed to speak, but it's slightly different in that you have to register. You can't just turn up before. You have to register through the website and fill in a one-page pro forma to say briefly what you intend to say. If anybody needs more information on that, they can contact the planning officers, but that information will be made available shortly. So we'll now go into committee and discuss the item. So I'll move the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lorver. I'll just make a couple of points by way of introduction that, for the benefit of maybe who didn't go through this in detail last time, but the structure plan and the height policy that's been referred to was the subject of many years of consultation and discussion up to 2015. And I think it's fair to say that even the 8-story to 11-story limit that came out of that was probably about as much as the community was supportive of, and perhaps reluctantly that was agreed to. But the current policy is it's a maximum of 8 stories, going up to 11 stories if all of 8 discretionary criteria are met. Okay, if all of them. So the policy is that 8 stories, and in certain areas it can go to 11 stories if 8 discretionary criteria are all met. Okay, and let's be very clear about that. In this case, the proponents are suggesting up to 23 stories rather than 11 without meeting all of the discretionary criteria. So I think the increase in height is very, very significant. Normally, when people talk about height discretions, they're talking about 1 or 2 stories extra on a building for some particular reason. They're not talking about the building being 3 times higher than was in the policy. So I just want to make that clear to people. And then I'll invite members of the committee to speak. Councillor Lawver.
I want to thank everyone for their time for coming down here tonight, and I know it's not always easy making the effort to come and speaking before the committee or council, but I really appreciate everyone being here tonight and making that effort. Um, I think I agree with a lot of what was said by the community. I really wish there was a way that we could fix the infrastructure before these buildings get built, because we all know that they're coming and we all know that there's going to be a problem, and that's hopefully something that we can work towards. Um, I also want to thank the staff for doing such a great amount of work on this and all the proposals before us as well. I don't want to forget to thank you guys. You're doing a Herculean effort there. If this does get approved by JDAP or SDAU or whatever new planning regime is implemented, this is going to completely overshadow the Dingo Flour Mill. I mean, you look at that, that's like the building in North Fremantle. This will be massively bigger than that. And like as the chair mentioned, we do have a plan for this area, and this what's being proposed is just significantly out of that. And I also really struggle with having a structural plan for the entire site and only seeing what half of the development is actually going to look like. If you have a structure plan, you really should see what the whole site is going to look like, and that would be something that I would be very keen to see what the second half of this proposal would be. And I really appreciated the comments about the industrial buildings as well. We recently tried to save some remnants on Brack Street, and we were unsuccessful. So yeah, this is one of the last kind of industrial buildings around. So I appreciate the comments about catching that 30 meters, and hopefully we can hear back from the staff on that as to if that was a change that we were not privy to. I guess so. I'm in support of the staff recommendation. 100%. I think it's very well done. I don't know that we can actually tweak this to make it better. I think if we went ahead and just voted this up or down, would probably be pretty good. But I did want to say one thing that I learned when I went to a JDAP meeting, well, over a year ago now, before I was elected on the council. If you ask the presiding member, you normally get 5 minutes to speak, but sometimes they will give you 10. So if you have things to say at the JDAP, you can request more time to speak. That was something that I didn't know until I actually attended a meeting. So just let the community know about that. But yeah, no, I'm in 100% favor of what's before us, and I hope that we can vote this recommendation.
Thank you. We do have, just ask the director to explain the extent of demolition that we referred to earlier.
Yeah, and through the chair, the guys here in planning have had a look at it. In both the original development application and the amended plans, we've assessed it on that section of building of 57.6 meters being retained. So it's been consistent in both sets of plans. I think the discrepancy that one of the speakers picked up on is picked up on one of the original demolition plans did show 72 meters of length being retained, which is actually incorrect. So one of the original demolition plans that was submitted were obviously wrong. But in terms of the assessment under the RAR, in both instances, it was based on the same length of retention of building.
Thank you. I think in terms of the recommendation, it does say it simply refers to the extent of demolition of heritage fabric. So I think that covers it, however big it is, because we're objecting to a lot of the demolition, including that. Any further speakers on the committee? Councillor Graham.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I'll just give my two bobs. Yeah, look, I strongly support the officer's recommendation on this one. This has been through the mill a couple of times, and it's been to this committee twice, I think, that I'm aware of. And it was fully supported. I think it was fully supported, I may be wrong, but it's strongly supported anyway to refuse this application. We can't get too worried about the JDAP application because, you know, most of us here aren't on it. So we're in the land of the lap of the gods, really, on what they decide. But it certainly is, if they all listen to the community like we have tonight, there is only one view that you can form, and that is refusal of the current proposal. Now, having said that, we've got to be aware that there is always going to be a proposal for this site, and that is going to include height. So whatever that height comes out at, we could be back here again in another 12 months discussing, you know, 14 stories as opposed to 8 or 11. So just be aware that something will no doubt come back to us, and we'll have to develop address that at the time. But we can only address tonight's application, and I strongly support the officer's recommendation, and I strongly support the refusal that they've come up with. So thank you.
Councillor Groom.
Yeah, like my colleagues, I feel like we've been here before. We've talked about this proposal, certainly talked to some of the potential benefits, such as, you know, the reuse of the old buildings, and any proposal that keeps and restores them is obviously something that we're really keen to look at. But the advice we're getting is that heritage adaptation isn't enough and not enough retention. But for me, the height is a showstopper. Whenever we're asked to consider a dispensation to the scheme, we have to look at whether the benefits that it delivers will kind of justify that dispensation, and that height doesn't deliver that benefit. Certainly one of the pieces of work in the proponent's response with the affordability is one that's really kind of caught my mind and attention. So the only dwellings in this development that would be affordable for the current income bands in North Fremantle is the one-bedroom units. The report prepared by the consultants for the proponents clearly states that 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom properties wouldn't be affordable for the moderate income band or the moderate income band at 120%. So this kind of elaborate argument that this product that they have include diversity is quite clearly not supported by a consultant's report. And I think it's a misunderstanding of the diversity we're trying to achieve, which is recognising that development in Fremantle, North Fremantle, other parts of our district are pricing people out of the market. So using the existing average median income in North Fremantle as a basis to decide whether this new development is going to give us more diversity is a nonsense, because we actually want to enable people on different incomes to be able to come and live in North Fremantle. So it's kind of a really deeply flawed argument. So to have all this extra height and not be creating more housing choice or more options, you know, what are we getting out of this as community? And instead we're getting significant loss of amenity for the local residents, but for our whole community, because it has such an impact on the overall landscape and sightline. So agree with Councillor Graham that we are always going to be needing to make a decision about extra height for this development, and I think we're all comfortable and understand that. But to support this order of extra height, more than 3 times what's envisaged in the scheme, I just can't see the benefit that would enable me, you know, to fulfil my responsibilities and to support that.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. obviously, everybody knows that I'm somewhat of an outlier on this issue, and that's comes from a lot of experience over a lot of issues in Fremantle and including North Fremantle, and a desire to see Perth develop in a way that stops the continual infill of the outer suburbs and actually embraces urban infill and high density living. I want to say from the outset, before I get booed, I guess, that I won't be supporting this proposal in its current form at, at this meeting. I can't tell you, because it would be ultra virus, to say how I might respond at JDAP, because I can't make that decision until such time as I'm actually there, which is the way the law works. It's the way the law works here. But I did want to talk about having the two hats. That JDAP actually was asking, or voted for a deferral because it wasn't prepared necessarily to refuse it outright. It felt that the proposal had a whole range of qualities about it that were admirable, that were likely to be good outcomes, but it also had a bunch of elements that clearly weren't acceptable to JDAP, and that's how we got the result. And it will be an interesting exercise to see how JDAP assesses whether the developer has listened to what JDAP said and come back with revisions that in any way meet in part or in full the sorts of things that the JDAP decision makers were looking for. My gut feeling right now is that they have not done anywhere near enough to satisfy the majority of JDAP members. And I would be surprised if it gets supported in the revised form that it's in. And I'll touch on a few things in that regard. The first thing is, as you all know, I look at the height policy in two ways. I look at the height policy in terms of view corridors from places which are so unloved now and so rarely used that I find the 2008 requirement for view corridors from those places to be unsupportable. I also was someone that advocated, as did a lot of people, for view corridors through the Leighton development. And to be honest, they don't work. And that's my opinion. It was my opinion at Leighton. Now, having supported view corridors, it's my opinion about the policy that endeavours to try and deliver view corridors through this area, most of which have already been compromised by existing development, which I wasn't around to approve, so you can blame somebody else for that. Having said that, in 2015, as Councillor Jones mentioned, we did go through a process, and there are clearly parts of this site and parts of other sites where buildings were or potentially able to go higher than the view corridors, higher than the horizon, if you like. And that process not only ended up with the 17 and 33 metre heights, the process actually included discussion about whether development could go to 46 metres. Now, that was ultimately not supported, but it was a seriously entertained proposal for a while. The community submission was not in favour of 33 metres. It wasn't even in favour of the sort of as of right heights. It was asking for 5 to 7 stories. So the notion that the community supported 33 metres is actually not correct. So we're always going to have this dilemma. I've looked at other sites, and I must say, sometimes the question, as soon as somebody thinks it's high rise, it's like we've got to fight against it. Now, for some people, high rise is 4 stories, 5 stories, 6 stories. And that's been a common thread in objections at this council. Clearly, the buildings that have been proposed on this development are high rise, and there's no question about that. But if we start from the premise that there is no place on that site for tall buildings, then we have to actually go back. I mean, even at 33 metres, it's going to be a tall building. If we want the sort of development that's at Leighton, which is 5 and 6 stories, then you also have to accept at a plot ratio of 2 that it will be essentially built to the edges. It will be essentially with minimal building separation within the development, that it is highly unlikely to provide much in the way of public open space within the development. And we'll probably end up with a lot more units because they will be smaller, because that's the sort of market. So this one has 200. We actually talked about 500 dwellings on this site in terms of that policy. This is not going to be achieved with this overall development, but if you squash it down and make it bulkier and flatter, I suspect it probably will be. So a lot of the concerns about the number of cars and those sort of things will come to the fore. It will be way more difficult to see a developer come forward with the sort of curtilage that sits around the heritage buildings and the like. So all of those things are balancing acts that I know we all have to do. But where I stand, what I see is that there is a sweet spot in this site where a taller building can occur. And by sweet spot, I mean the spot that is significantly distant from the developments to the south and to the east and southeast. That is not right on top of the curtilage of the heritage building. That is far enough, or perhaps almost far enough away from the foreshore of the beach to not be considered in the way that we consider the Gold Coast, and sits at on a high element that already exists, in the same way that perhaps the signal station sits on top of Cantonment Hill, albeit nowhere near as high. But I imagine if we object to a building being higher than a hill, we would object to the building of the signal station if it was being proposed right now. I don't necessarily start with that as my sort of starting point. So in my view, the tower T1 is located in a location that would be acceptable to have a taller building, whether it's the size of the 22 stories, or whether it's 16, or whether it was 46 metres, probably is a moot point, because the rest of the development as proposed is not supportable in its current form. And that is particularly true of the second tower and its relationship to Coventry Parade, notwithstanding that they have effectively created a 35-metre wide gap between the development to the south and the new building, the new tower. It is still at a scale and a juxtaposition which suggests that it needs to be significantly reduced in height. There are other elements of the proposal that could be increased without having significant detrimental effect. But that then gets into that whole conversation about whether you squash development down and fill up most of the site, or you allow it to go up and create a huge amount of open space. It is a balancing act. I'd also like to say that I think the JDAP members, and I know I was, hoping for a significant change in the approach to the heritage buildings. And that hasn't been forthcoming. It is true that they have modified the admin wing, but it's still essentially facadism, which I thought had gone out in the 90s. It still significantly compromises the internal characteristics of the administration wing, which I considered to be important. it still removes almost completely the workshop building. And there is clearly the space and opportunity for some adaptive reuse of that building, a part of it, not necessarily all of it, but a part of it, and a significantly greater opportunity for appropriate level of interpretation of it. So in that sense, the developer has fallen a long way short, I think, because they have slavishly attempted to keep their modernist architecture theme going through to the new development, rather than accepting that the heritage building that was there and there a long time before they came along does have to be valued and should have been the starting point, rather than being a very modern architectural experience. There are other aspects which I could talk on, including that I don't support a one-way road. I have always supported a two-way road. That's against the community view, but I think if you're going to integrate communities, if you're going to expect the developer to integrate with the community, we need to expect the community to integrate with the development. And it is illogical to have a road system that requires locals who want to get from one place to another, from their house to their supermarket, to go out onto a regional road and then duck back in 100 metres further up the road. We do need good local connectivity. The whole of North Fremantle needs significantly improved connectivity between its local areas. We all know that. That's what we've been arguing for. But in this instance, we're arguing against it. And I don't understand why. But I certainly also don't understand how a developer thinks that driving through a car park, effectively, is some sort of substitute for a road that creates connectivity. So it falls way short of the standard that I would expect for that level of connectivity. That can be fixed, but they haven't shown any intent to fix that. There was also commentary through the DAC about the materiality and the design. Now, this is an interesting one because the reality is our own documents call for distinctive architecture for this site. Distinctive meaning different, meaning to differentiate between what is around. If we are to marry or match to what is around, what is it that we're going to marry and match to? This whole area, the Buckland Hill wasteland that existed for so long, that wonderful buffer between the western suburbs and Freo, almost considered to be essential at one stage from a demographic point of view, has been converted into, a housing estate, a brain pattern housing estate. We have that sort of sense of the Tuscany that suddenly landed in North Fremantle. We had massive level of heavy industry as well as light industry and the like. So the McCabe precinct needs to become a destination and a place in its own right. Distinctive in its own right. Connected, integrated, yes, but distinctive. So I don't understand what it is that people are trying to say when they want it to be more like what's around there, unless they're actually saying, just give us another brain pattern subdivision and whatever the latest version of a Tuscan villa is. So the architectural response, I think, is actually not unreasonable. I think that the DAC made very relevant points about the sustainability of the materials that are being proposed. But the reality is, architecturally, I think we would actually benefit from having a distinctive approach to that environment. I've well and truly used more time than I probably should, so I won't continue. But I don't support the modifications. I don't think they've gone anywhere near far enough. But I hope that the explanations that I've provided do at least provide those who don't support my opinion some understanding as to how I've formed mine. Thank you.
The Mayor?
Thank you. Look, I'm hopeful that JDAP will continue to see sense on this issue. I think, they took a look, they said, go back, do some work. I think we can all agree that the work didn't really meet the brief that was done between the last JDAP meeting and where we are now. And JDAP, now and going forward, still has to bear regard to our local planning and policies. And in this case, that's the LPP, local planning policy for the area, which is a result of significant community engagement. And it doesn't say North Rio needs to stay, exactly as it is forever. It says, yes, we could cope with a little bit of height on this site, but it has to be done right for the community. So I'm fairly confident the people who sit on JDAP will have good use of our very unambiguous officer's report on this. I thought we were particularly clear and straightforward on a number of things, and the issue of height being one of them. And I quote from page 114, the proposed building heights for all 3 residential towers significantly exceed the maximum building heights prescribed across all height zones within LPP 3.11, in some cases by 554%. So I think that's fairly unambiguous. As the chair said before, there is some discretion if you can meet 8 conditions. 3 of the 8 were met, and that discretion doesn't go anywhere near 554%. So the RAR report that goes to JDAP from our officers will, I think, be very clear on these issues. I had to do a bit of a thought experiment and think, what would have happened if these developers had actually come and talked to you guys in the North Fremantle community? Because the expertise in this community, and even in the immediate kind of stone's throw community from this development, is huge. I don't think you would have said, no, leave it how it is, don't do anything ever. I think you would have said, there's a reasonable solution to have been found here with your experience and your expertise and your love of the place. Probably the first thing you would have said is give us a supermarket. I have to say, any developer who's listening, if you are looking at sites in North Fremantle, give us a supermarket. Please, a proper one, not a providor. I don't quite know what that means. Jam, probably. But also, when we talk about density, let's talk about density done well. So we probably mostly agree with density. We agree that urban sprawl isn't a great thing. We agree that we don't want to destroy, countless amounts of bushland on the urban fringe and all the costs associated with that. But density has to do it well, and it has to do it at a human scale, and it has to do it in a way that genuinely provides diversity. And I think Councillor Groom spoke very well to that. That means that people can downsize, people can move out, people can stay in the community that they love in a home that they can actually afford. What we have instead, and I'll try not to brutalise it too much, but we have a real kind of what moment, the Ob City, when Observation City was first built, and everyone was like, what? What is that on the coastline? For me, this is a real risk for someone who supports density. If density like this gets pushed through at another level, we start to lose our support for density, because we say, what is, something that sounds reasonable to begin with turns into 554% more than what we agreed to. And I really don't like that for Fremantle. I think we do need infill and we do need density, but we do need it done well, and it can be done well, and it can be done well commercially. Developments like these, I feel like it literally gives the finger to the local community, and we don't want that. And our officers have done a great job preparing some very strong grounds for us to put in a report for refusal. So stay tuned. Come to JDAP. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to raise an issue of parking, because that was one of the specific reasons for deferral. And I think, I'm not sure if there's an error in the report or if it's misleading, but bear with me on this. But it says they're 52 bays short, so they've met the requirement for the residential. They've reduced the commercial floor significantly in order to get the commercial parking closer to the target. The report says they are, in some places says they're 52 bays short, in other places says it's 82, and somewhere else says it's 71. The reason for that is complicated because they've included 10 bays on the road and 20 bays in the current nursery site, which is part of phase 2, as parking for this development. Okay, the officers have counted that parking as if it is agreed to for this development, but at the same time said they don't approve of it. So I just wonder if can we clarify the report somehow going forward, because it comes to the conclusion that the parking need is satisfied, whilst at the same time saying that we don't approve of 30 of the bays they're proposing. So I'm just wondering if it's too complicated to move an amendment, but is there some way we can actually tidy that up before it goes to JDAP?
Through the chair, essentially the actual shortfall is 52 bays. If you want to obviously change that from 71 to 52, that can be done. When assessing obviously on-site car parking, that there is where the confusion's kicking in, because at the moment they're only proposing 141 bays in the basement, 20 bays in that nursery area, and 10 bays in the street. So if you wanted to exclude the 10 bays in the street from the overall assessment, then you could obviously go down the path and saying it's 71 as what it is indicated in the planning assessment, and that you could change it to 71.
So the nursery side, the project uses the nursery, that is part of phase 2, but they're proposing to count it as parking for phase 1.
It's still part of the development side. That's correct.
I'm just wondering how do people, I mean, I find the idea of putting 10 bays on the street and claiming it's part of your development a little bit odd. So is there a simple amendment I can move to simply say that those are not accepted as part of the development?
You can say there's 62 car bay shortfall.
Would you like to draft whatever change? Would it be a seconder for that? So we're accepting that the 20 bays in the garden centre are kind of temporary, because then they'll have to be accounted for as part of phase 2. But the 10 on the street can't be counted as part of the development, which seems perfectly reasonable. You second it?
I am happy to second it. I just wanted to point out.
We'll discuss it whilst they're drafting the actual words yet.
Well, on page 126, where it alludes to the 52 bay shortfall that you're talking about, right below that, it says 82 bay shortfall given parking in future POS not supported. Maybe we just delete the 52 bay shortfall and leave it at the 82. Maybe that's a cleaner way to.
It also includes the ones in the nursery, which can be supported provided they're not counted twice and they're not counted again when they disappear in phase 2. So I think that's where we need some clarity. Have you got some suggestions?
The amendment you're actually seeking is in the report rather than a condition or a reason for refusal. So we can amend the RAR obviously to include that. That's simple to do.
But would that then modify your conclusion that the parking provision is adequate?
We never said that it was adequate.
It does on the last.
No. In terms of obviously the assessment, it's a reason obviously that we say there's a shortfall. What you're saying is obviously the increase from 10 extra bays by not supporting the street bays. Does that change officers' position?
In the report, you said that you thought the parking was now adequate because of being close to bus lanes, railway lines, and so on. And I don't actually agree with that. So I'm just wondering how we can deal with that. If you take away the 10 on the street, would you still feel the parking provision is adequate? Sorry to bring this up, but bear in mind the officers only got this submission on February the 3rd, and have had a significant amount of work to do in putting this together. Sorry, we don't take discussion from the gallery after the meeting. Any other comments people would like to make while we're waiting for that to be looked at?
So, with respect to what you're saying on the parking, officers very regularly tell us that something is not compliant, but from their determination that they think it is acceptable. So I think we need to be a little bit careful about terminology there. Being compliant and being acceptable are two different things. And I think the officers, and I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't get it clarified, but I think the officers are entitled to make the recommendation of approving something when there is a parking shortfall. They do it almost regularly in the city centre and a lot of these developments. You might agree or disagree with it, but it's not because they've made a mistake. It's because that is their determination or recommendation. So I just want us to be a little bit careful about terminology.
I accept that, but what I'm asking is, would they still make that same judgment if you take out the 10 on the street? And the other issue I'd say is we often allow shortfalls in parking, in fact, almost always, but that's often in the CBD or somewhere where there are lots of car parks and lots of other options. There are absolutely no other options here. There's no parking on Thompson Road. There's the 10 bays on the street next door, but there is not a case that you can go somewhere else. If you arrive here and can't find parking, you don't go here, or you abandon your car across somebody's driveway on Thompson Road. So sorry, could you just clarify what you think the best way forward is?
Yes, through the chair, if we could take that one on notice and look at that before we submit to JDAP. I think it's quite simple to adjust the figures to take the 10 bays out, but I think the question being asked is, would that then change the fundamental analysis of parking provision? We'd like a little bit more time to look at that and take that one on notice. We understand what you're asking for there. Yep.
Right, that's fine, thank you. Any further discussion on the item as a whole? Councillor Lang.
Thanks. Thanks for all the comments tonight. I won't rehash what everyone else has said, but I think the key thing that I want to convey is that we have to accept that development is going to come to this site in the near future and into the whole McCabe Street precinct. We see at planning time and time again, things come up for approval and get rejected, but eventually something does come along and get developed. And I think we, as our council, we need to be better prepared for something occurring in the McCabe Street precinct. And I alluded to that earlier on. We agree that we want a high density in the area, but we've got to do it right. And also, we all agree that these buildings are historic. In fact, I would even suggest that they're of international historic significance, given the architects worked so closely with Henry Ford to develop these sites. And that's one of the things that I was challenged mostly with this development, is the idea we can bulldoze the back half of the Henry Ford factory, where there's an identical building to this in San Francisco, and they've made it into a tourism treasure. And we need to be doing that in North Fremantle to this building. My more ironic comments that I'd like to make, though, while I'm standing up for the former Ford factory, all the cars tonight, discussions tonight have been around cars and car movement and traffic, and that's and discussing with main roads has been a big part of the back end work we've been doing. When I hint that our council need to be more prepared for this area, it's not about adding the extra lane to cope with the influx of cars. We need to look at a better integrated transport solution for this pocket of North Fremantle. And that's something that I would like to see happening in parallel. If we are meeting with main roads, we absolutely should be meeting with the PTA as well to look at other options for moving people around this area, so that North Fremantle residents can get into the city better, or Perth City, or get into Fremantle easier. So let's be more prepared for high density living coming to McCabe Street precinct, and let's not make all the discussion around cars and car movement.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to close the debate and move to a vote unless anybody wants. Okay, so we're looking at the officer's recommendation, which is for refusal. That's a recommendation to JDAP. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. And thank you to the members of the community for coming along, and thank you for your very worthwhile contributions. We'll just pause for a minute whilst you leave, unless you want to stay and listen to the rest of the agenda. And if you do have any questions about how JDAP works, please contact the officers or me or any of the other members of the committee. Thank you. Going to go to item 1 next. I've got 2 people wishing to speak. I presume you're the applicants. Declan Cregan, is it? From Urbis. You are speaking in favour of the recommendation, which is for approval. This is, 15 McCabe Street. You have 3 minutes. Thank you. The right-hand button.
There we go. I think it's on now. Good evening, everyone. My name is Declan. I'm a town planner from Urbis. Urbis is representing the proponent for the 15 McCabe Street DA. I'm speaking in favour of the officer recommendation for this item. Tonight, I'll briefly address some of the planning considerations, and I'm available to answer any questions after. This proposal represents a really good outcome for the site. The project architects, MJA Studios, have taken a really undertaken a very detailed and extensive design consideration for this site. The proposed 42 multiple dwellings will offer a high degree of livability and incorporates a range of innovative and sustainable design outcomes. In addition to this, the proposal incorporates a public art component and public realm upgrades. Overall, the proposal provides a high quality design that is contextually appropriate. The project team have had extensive engagement with the city's planning team and the DAC. We've taken on board feedback, we've modified our design, and we believe the application is now in a position to be approved. This is reflected in the RAR's recommendation for approval. We feel that the combination of contextual appropriateness, high quality design, and strong consideration for the amenity of the surrounding precinct provides strong merit in favour of this proposal. When considering the height on a precinct basis, the proposal is consistent with the surrounding built form. As identified in the massing diagrams, I believe on pages 42 and 43 of the agenda, the proposal is consistent and complements the built form of the adjacent sites. If the proposal were to adhere to the baseline height identified within the framework, the outcome would become contextually inconsistent. The proposed development will provide for continuity and consistency in the built form along McCabe Street. Additionally, the design incorporates a number of North Fremantle inspired design elements. More on that from the architects. North Fremantle has emerged as a place that provides for a high level of residential amenity and in a higher density context. This proposal is consistent with that and promotes the local context. Residents of the building will experience a high degree of amenity and sustainable living. And we've strongly considered the amenity of the surrounding sites as well. The detail of our investigations have been provided for in the RAR. Overall, we have reasonably demonstrated that the proposal will not adversely affect the amenity of the surrounding sites. So based on the strong linkages to local context, the consistency with the emerging built form, and the minimal impacts to the amenity within the precinct, we think the proposed height and the development outcome for the site makes sense. To summarise and conclude, the proposed development will deliver the missing piece to the puzzle along this McCabe Street stretch, and the variations, notably height, that we're seeking, are worthy of approval. We respectfully request that the Planning Committee support the officer's recommendation for approval, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any further. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Sullivan?
I just wanted to check whether you're aware of the proposed amendments in the additional documents and whether your group is planning to speak to those or not, or has feedback on those or not.
What documents are you referring to?
I don't know if officers have a hard copy of the additional documents, but there are 3 proposed modifications in the additional document. Obviously, it's still going to JDAP. The amendments are one relates to the amended development shall be submitted with a modification that deals with a range of dwelling sizes to meet the silver level requirements as defined in the livable housing design guidelines. So there's an element about that. There's an element that actually talks about the verge. That's probably inconsequential, I would think. And there is a recommendation that talks about the requirement for additional single bedroom units. So basically taking your levels 2 and 3 and replicating them over levels 4 and 5 to increase the volume of single dwellings. So I'm just asking whether you're aware of those. I think the officers have popped them up in the screen. So I don't know whether anyone else was wishing to speak, but perhaps gives you an opportunity.
You haven't seen that before?
No.
Well, can I just suggest that they're on the screen there if you want to have a look, and then maybe we'll hear from Chris Dwyer whilst you're doing that. So, all right. So you'll be the one to speak on this part? Okay. So questions to the architect, not on the amendment. Okay, thanks. So Chris Dwyer, you are familiar with the amendment, or?
No, this is the first I've seen it.
Just give you a minute to have a look.
That's just one of the three. So perhaps once you've read that one, if you indicate, the officers could move on to the next one.
Happy to move on to the next point. Happy to move on to the next point.
So do you need more time to?
No, I'm ready for the last.
You're right to go back to the first one? Or do you want to make your presentation first?
Sorry, I won't actually be speaking on these topics. I'll
Right.
be handing over to our senior.
So do you wish to make a presentation as well?
I do.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's take that now. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Chris. I'm the architect that's worked on this project from MJA Studio. Thank you very much for having us this evening. Any opportunity to speak is much appreciated. Speaking specifically to 15 McCabe Street, this is a considered response to a compact site within the broader McCabe Street precinct. We see the proposal as the missing puzzle piece within the residential streetscape, and will provide a continuity of scale between Siskas to the west and the future Sarai to the east. We have been through a robust iterative design process with the City of Fremantle and believe the 5-star Green Star proposal is of high merit as worthy of the Planning Committee's endorsement. The proposed 42 apartments are generously appointed to reflect the needs of local residents and will afford views down Rocky Bay to the south and Cottesloe Pine glimpses to the north. Deep scallops to the east and west elevations afford a number of apartments with triple aspects, resulting in exceptional internal amenity, while softening the interface with the current and anticipated future neighbours. The majority of apartments are cross-ventilated and receive north sun to living areas. All apartments are designed with ageing in place in mind, with features such as wider doors and hallways ensuring relevance long-term. The proposal's built form design is deeply influenced by the North Fremantle landscape, industrial history, and more recent land uses. From the heavily eroded Woggle Caves on the leeward side of the Rocky Bay Ridge through the former manufacturing buildings and nearby containerised port. Textured and tactile finishes to the lower levels frame the street and merge the proposed vegetated verge and front setback zones. Cascading landscape spills from the podium frames linking to the craggy adjacent limestone hillsides. The podium's perimeter contains deep reveals for trees and true deep soil, breaking down the podium into smaller extents. The apartment forms over are reflective of the river, with its many bends and sweeping inlets. Brass-toned metal and stained timber details to the balconies reference the boats in the bay. Curved glass wind baffles to the corner apartments mitigate the southwesterly whilst also reflecting the sky. The rear of the apartment form is pulled well clear of the north to maximise breezes and permit precinct views from Mount Lyell through to the ocean. The proposal is designed with the future in mind, having 2 publicly accessible EV charging visitor bays in conjunction with the necessary on-site infrastructure to afford 100% EV charging for all residents as we transition to vehicle electrification. There will be no fossil fuels used on site for cooking or heating, which, when combined with the proposal's other sustainability initiatives, result in a 5-star Green Star level in excess of the city's minimum requirement. We see the proposal as a fitting addition to the North Fremantle end of McCabe Street, with a considered, contextually appropriate scale and rich design narrative linking to place. We respectfully seek the support and endorsement of the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Look, as we haven't moved this item yet, I'm just asking, would you like 10 minutes just to go outside and discuss that, or are you happy to respond to it now? So you can respond now. Now, bear in mind, these amendments haven't been voted on. The committee doesn't necessarily support the amendments. They've been tabled, not yet, but they've been flagged. So if you'd like to speak to those.
Certainly, and I will obviously have to speak at a high level. So my name is Ray Heron. I'm a director with Urbis and have clearly been working with the proponents in relation to this proposal. Again, without necessarily speaking to detail, because again, well, I suppose we would have to speak on, we'd have to take some of these items on notice. But what I can say is that in terms of the dwelling mix, that has been a significant consideration and was part of the discussions that we engaged with both with officers and with the Design Advisory Committee. And I fully accept that in terms of strict compliance, it does not do so. And clearly there is a framework which considers multiple factors. We do, however, feel that the proposal as it stands does provide a genuine effort in providing a range of dwelling sizes. And again, the application of that is dependent on site context, and we did provide technical information which explained why we went for the mix we did based on demand factors. The second part is in relation to, I suppose, and again, I'm not going to pretend to have an intimate knowledge of the livable housing design guidelines because I delegate that stuff these days. But the ultimate intention is around the sustainability of the dwellings. And what I can say is, and I don't often give much credit to architects, I must say, but the architects in this instance have in fact gone above and beyond. So although it may not sit within this particular guideline framework, I would be concerned, and what we will do prior, obviously, to, depending on the decisions of this committee today, is provide some insight in terms of potential implications of that at the JDAP. In terms of the element around the street trees, I could confirm that we would have no issues, and our current proposition is, in fact, to provide a detailed landscape plan as part of the next stage of the process once we obviously have dealt with the fundamentals of the approval. That being said, I'm happy to take further questions if that be of help.
Are there any further questions? Okay, thank you. So we'll take any discussion on the item other than the amendments first. Does anybody wish to discuss the item? Oh, sorry, I'll move the item and seconded by Councillor Lang. So I'll take any discussion on the item, run the amendments first, if there is any. No. So Councillor Sullivan, would you like to move any or all of your amendments? Move them one by one, I think, because they're quite different.
Yes, look, I might speak on the item first and then move the amendments. And I'm quite happy to take them one by one. Firstly, this is a really well-considered development, and we shouldn't realistically have any problem in dealing with it in a very positive way. And despite the fact that I think the height limit on this site is 14 metres, and this is significantly higher, I'm imagining that elected members will be supportive of that in this instance. So the issues that have sort of been brought forward in the report were the ones that kind of prompted me to write some recommendations that dealt with some of those matters in a little bit more detail. And I'm not wedded to them, I have to say. I've actually put them forward for discussion as opposed to feeling like they're absolutely essential to an approval. And I wanted to put them forward early enough prior to the JDAP process to ensure that both elected members here, but also the developers before they get to JDAP, are aware of them. I'm not likely to push them any further than here if the committee doesn't support them, because as I said, I'm not entirely wedded to them. They seem to be reflective of some of the things that were said in the report, and I'm happy for officers to comment on those. So I'll move the first of the amendments first, which is relates to the livable housing guidelines.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Groom, like to speak? Speak, Councillor Sullivan, or speak specifically to that?
Yeah, like what I will do is, I guess consistent with Mr. Heron, I'm not full bottle on these either, and it might just be an opportune moment for the officers to provide an explanation before we give consideration to them.
Thank you, and through the chair, essentially this condition in particular relates to obviously universal, obviously housing, and obviously that's a requirement in Volume 2 of the Residential Design Codes. Part of the application that was submitted, there was a statement for universal provided by the proponent's consultant at that time. As a part of that, though, it referred to obviously that the development was going to comply with the relevant Australian standards and National Construction Code, and that was fine, and that is true. That is it's a requirement. But this particular condition refers a lot, obviously, with these implications, is internal to the units themselves, and there was very little comment on that in that report. So this is a bit of a belts and braces condition, obviously making it comply with obviously Volume 2 requirement, and it does give those two options, being number 1 and number 2, as a two ways to satisfy that criteria, and that's why it's worded like it is.
Do you wish to speak?
Yeah, look, the reason I asked about this one is I basically asked the question of staff: are we getting a development that makes universal, not so much universal access, I think we call it sort of accessibility ready development, that a certain number of units are accessible ready for the retiring population. A lot of these sort of units are taken up by people who are empty nesting, and the ability to have them accessibility ready, things like showers, the space in bathrooms, those sort of things, is really important. It has been important to council in setting policy, and I felt that it was something that probably needed to be in there. So that's where the question came from. The officers provided this as the way to deal with that question.
Right. Councillor Groom, you are next in the queue, but can Councillors Lang and Graham turn off their microphones?
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, guys. So I'm probably half bottle on these standards, and I support certainly had a say in the apartment design code and supported them there, and I supported the intent of Councillor Sullivan's recommendation. My observation in looking at the floor plans is they're pretty spacious. On the whole, people could move around them, and it's not an unreasonable change, I would imagine, to accommodate that, because the bathrooms certainly wouldn't meet the standards. So it's probably an adjustment more than anything else. And essentially, for people in the room that don't know what that means, we're either saying that they're pretty accessible, so you can get around with your wheelie walker for 20% of the units, or 5% of them would be fully accessible, so if you were in a wheelchair, you could use it. So that's the difference in those two standards, and that is what the design policy says. So thank you for picking it up. I know we've had a few that you could get in the front door, but you couldn't get much further, and the intent of the design policy is to make sure that you can't, it's not just that you can visit the foyer, that you can visit your friends or live in a unit without having to redesign the whole bathroom. So yeah, that would be a good outcome.
Thank you. Councillor Lang.
Thanks. I'm a little bit unsure about this because I don't know where we're starting from and where we're going. I don't know what the gap is here, and I don't know what the ask is of the developer. If it's possible, would we be able to get any clarification about where the current design is and where this might be going, and is this a bridge too far, or what are we looking at? Is it possible we can maybe get some feedback?
I will allow you to speak again. We don't normally do that, but given the fact we just raised this late, we'll give you another couple of minutes.
Thank you. Upon reading the condition at some leisure, rather than standing here and trying to absorb it quickly, the part one, the 20%, we did intentionally design the apartments for aging in place so that we can commit to the 20% silver standard. Hallways have been made intentionally a metre wide. Doorways to the units have been made wider. So in terms of what this condition is seeking to achieve, we actually designed it in already. So hopefully that clarifies.
So say that for number one or for number one and two?
Number two is challenging.
Right. So number one, you are happy to accept, no problem. Yes.
Correct. Yeah. So I guess provided it stays in or, that's okay. But definitely.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. Or okay. So you have no problem with us supporting this amendment, basically.
Yeah, it's current wording correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Further comments, Councillor Graham?
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to support this amendment. I think the developers have mostly got a better handle on this than mostly us around the table. So, but anyway, that seems to have, as much as they were thrown to start with, I'm mostly thrown now. But if they're happy to support just number one, is that what I'm sort of hearing? I see nods of heads, I suppose. But it sounds like they've already done it anyway, so I don't know why we need it. So we could still not vote for it because it appears that it's in the application, and it's, so I don't know. But anyway, I'm not supporting what's written in green for number 31. Okay.
Any further discussion?
If it gets to that point.
Ready to vote? Okay, so all those in favour of the amendment? That's Councillor Graham against.
Yes.
And move on to the second one. If you'd like to move that, Councillor Sullivan.
That relates to the issue of the single bedroom dwellings, and I have to say I was very unsure as to whether to move this or not. I thought perhaps get a seconder first.
Is there a seconder?
There might not be one.
If there's not one, that makes it very simple.
Yeah.
No seconder? Okay, so that lapses. The third one.
The third one I think is uncontentious, which is regarding the street. It's not essential to be in there. I just wanted it to be flagged early on that there would be a need for street trees, because often these developments don't end up with street trees. They sort of somehow miraculously get left off, but also the location of them becomes critical in terms of the design, and that's why the recommendation is worded the way it is.
So is there a second for that? Councillor Lang, any discussion? Okay, all those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. So with those two amendments included and one not, we'll discuss any discussion on the item as a whole. Yes, Councillor Groom, sorry.
Yeah, I just also want to echo Councillor Sullivan's comments. It is a well-designed building. It will deliver a lot of amenity for residents, and it's nice to see these projects coming in. I do think it's the first development in McCabe Street since I've been on council that hasn't attracted all sorts of attention from residents. So maybe having 130 Serling Street on the agenda kind of distracted a bit. But anyway, it is a good development, and it will add to the streetscape, I think.
Okay, we're ready to vote. Sorry, Mayor.
Really just echoing Councillor Groom's points, you know, there were a lot of North Freo residents who didn't decide to stay on for this item, and I think that does speak to the consideration that's been given, and the idea that we can do density well, and it's not impossible, and it's still saleable and, you know, commercial, and, you know, let's do more of that and less of the other. So thank you.
Okay, any further discussion before we vote? Okay, all those in favour? Recommendation to JDAP, that's unanimous, thank you. So item 4, we have Tarin Pietronino. Yep. This is the unauthorised screening to existing boundary fence, Cad Street. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, my name's Taryn, and my husband Christopher and I are the owners of 8 Cad Street in Beaconsfield. And I'm really just here to explain a little bit more as to why we feel the need to keep the 600 millimetre permeable screening to the existing fence alongside our 8A neighbours. We have a Cooley Cross pet dog who last year we discovered she could clear a 1.9 metre colorbond fence prior to moving into number 8. We alerted our 8A neighbours of this and requested for the increase in height. They declined and had suggested for better training of the animal, alter our backyard, and if the dog did enter the backyard, they would treat it as a dangerous animal. So we were inclined to discuss with local planning, who they did alert us to the requirements of up to 500 millimetres of screening was acceptable without approval. But upon speaking with our contractor, their screens were only available in 300 millimetre heights, which is why we went ahead with the 600 in total. There's a portion of panelling at the rear of the property that so we've had to retain the property from north to south across the rear of our property. This is because our neighbours on the northern and eastern sides are both higher than our property. We're on a hill. So in fact, the northern side is actually 1.4 metres. Their ground level is 1.4 metres higher than ours, which is why the retaining in our property was necessary. So the retaining wall that abuts to the fence that's along the 8A boundary gives a panel height of 1.35 metres. So from the top of the retaining wall to the top of the fence is 1.35 metres, which our dog can easily clear. Even with 300 millimetres of screening, she can still clear, which is why we went with the 600 millimetres in the end. I guess I just want to confirm that our main reason for the 600 millimetres is to keep our dog in our property, to keep her safe, and to not have any her enter any other property, because she does suffer from severe anxiety and she sees the behaviour. So we're doing all the training things that they had suggested that was already happening. But yeah, basically we think we need the 600 still because 300 isn't quite enough to keep her inside of our property. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, thanks. We'll move into committee. So I'll move the officer's recommendation, which is for approval, but not the approval that you want. I think is the way I read it. It's approval, but without the extra, as much of the extra height as you want. So I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Graham. Any discussion? No discussion. So we're clear I'm clear the recommendation is to approve the height, but not as high as the applicant wants. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So we're all clear what we're voting on. So all those in favour of, sorry, Councillor Groom.
I do have a question for officers. I'm interested in the idea that the standard materials to extend fences may not make it possible to extend the fences in the way that the policy provides. Any comment around that?
Yeah, there is a lot of materials out there that do meet the 500 mil requirement. It's just the chosen particular infill paneling that they've chosen here does come in 300 mil slats. So it's not like there's a limitation of 500 mil screening material out there. There is other options.
Right. Any further discussion? So, Councillor Lorber.
Just a quick question. If this, is approved as written, would there be anything stopping the homeowner from putting some trellising on the top of it and growing some vines or any sort of vegetation? Would that be?
Anyone can grow vegetation, obviously, as a form of screening without the need for planning approval. There's no limitation on the height of that. If you're talking about physically putting a structure up so the trellis could grow across the top of it, we do have limitations, and that's where the 500mm screening material does come into play. Anything above that, they seek planning approval, like where we are here today.
Any further discussion? Okay, we'll move to a vote. All those in favour of the officer's recommendation? Yes? Not ready? Ready to vote? Yes? So all those in favour of the officer's recommendation? If you're against, there is no alternative recommendation. So those against? So there is no alternative recommendation. Does that mean it needs to go to council, or? Sorry?
I wonder, Mr. Chair, if perhaps we should have moved an amendment and tested that. Well, unless you want to deal with it at full council, it's up to the presiding member.
Okay, so the only option we seem to have is the two of us ask for that decision to go to council. That is the decision to refuse the officers, to disagree with the officer recommendation. Then goes to council, and then it gives people the opportunity to write an amendment. Okay, so I will ask for it to go to council if someone else wishes to agree. Councillor Groom. So I'm sorry that's rather messy, but what I understand it is the committee is voting to support your point of view, but we don't have a recommendation written and notice given, so it needs to go to full council. Okay, is that clear? So I'm sorry, I'll have to come to council on the date. What is it? 4th Wednesday. We'll talk to you outside. Okay. Item 5, Nicholas Crescent. Extra additional driveway. Are you here to speak? Yeah. Nick Main. So 3 minutes. Thanks. That's on, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'd just like to firstly thank the committee for inviting me to return to speak to you again and putting in an amendment from the meeting in December. For those of you that were not here in December, I've requested a new crossover for my property. And the reason I've done that is to allow me to relocate the current parking area and build a new parking area on the eastern side of the property. I've done that, or I've made that request because my daughter has a disability and a visual impairment following a brain hemorrhage, and she has basically a loss of vision on her left-hand side. Current parking setup is on an angle, and quite often the car doors close unexpectedly because of the slope, and that's actually struck her a few times now. So I'm looking to try and minimise that risk by having a flat parking area, which is difficult to achieve where it currently is, given that I only have a right of way over the existing driveway, no actual say over how it works, and limitations of space at the front of the property. So the other thing is, going forward, we're hoping that despite her visual impairment, she may be able to drive. The current layout of the driveway and the parking area means that any vehicles that are actually leaving the rear properties will be actually coming from behind 90 degrees for her, and that is actually the one area where she has just about zero vision. So allowing me to move that parking across that other side will actually make things much safer, not just for her, but also for the other residents at the rear properties. Following the initial meeting, I was asked to provide some more detailed landscaping plans, which I have done. I engaged a local Hilton resident, Robin from Nest Gardens, and they've developed a plan which allows me to actually plant multiple shade trees together with some native woodwise planting, both in the existing park area, and that parking area is currently directly to the north of the house. So other than supporting my daughter, this will actually improve passive solar outcomes and visual amenity to the property as well. The remaining thing really, I guess, is sort of precedent. Currently walking up and down my street, 5 of the 7 nearest properties that have been subdivided already have independent crossovers to front and rear. I can't speak as to whether or not those were actually approved, but that is the state. Secondly, the R codes. Obviously, the recommendation is not to approve based on that, as well as the local Hilton policies. The R codes have already been trying to think of the right word, but there are two houses being built behind me at the moment on the rear block, which is outside the arcades. I actually support that decision, but again, it falls outside the arcades and adds further weight to the fact that exemptions can be made in the area. So I'm asking the committee to please consider my request to best support my daughter, make an exemption to the current policies, and allow me to construct a crossover that will allow for the change of the parking area.
Okay, thank you. Any questions to the applicant? Councillor Lorver?
Yeah, thanks for coming. Could you maybe describe to us a little bit about like the crossover itself and like and the drawings that you put in there just says proposed new crossover and kind of what materials you're thinking might make that up, and maybe talk a little bit about the landscaping plan that was submitted if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm really prepared to take whatever guidance the council has on the crossover. It is my understanding that for the location under the policies as they stand at the moment, the standard would be a 3 metre wide concrete crossover. That said, I'm more than happy to work and look at other options. I don't want to be disturbing any of the existing street trees, so if that means looking towards some sort of permeable solution, then I'm happy to look at that. Same with the verge planting, native planting, as recommended by local landscapers, will be all water-wise, mulched, native planting. Hopefully that will also blend nicely with the upgrades that the council's recently done with Griffiths Park, which is directly opposite.
If further questions? Councillor Lorver?
And yeah, and as much as you're comfortable sharing with your daughter and her disability, can you maybe just give us a little bit of, because the entrance to your house is on one side and that's where the parking is, on how moving the parking really is going to, impact your daughter and her ability to drive and enter and exit a vehicle?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the thing with her, she had a brain hemorrhage year 5 on Christmas Day, unfortunately. She has, as a result of that, her vision is perfect, but her brain has been impacted, and so she has a 40% loss of vision, and that is predominantly on the left-hand side, lower quadrant, all the way through to the upper side. So little to no vision on that outside. So the as I mentioned, the layout to the drive at the moment means that if she does get approval to drive, which is something we're still not sure yet, but we'll hopefully be finding out soon, will allow her to safely pull out of the driveway because, as I say, currently with the angles of the driveway being the block much wider at the front than it is at the rear, means that if she pulls out of the drive of the parking area into the driveway, any vehicles that may be coming down the driveway will actually be coming from behind her, which is, as I say, one area she really doesn't have any vision. So obviously that can be mitigated to moving your head to a certain degree, but there's still a risk associated with that. So the other part, of course, is to say because it's a green title block, I have a right of way access at the moment with the existing driveway, crossover and driveway going up the side of the property, which means I have no say in how that's managed or maintained. I have no say in the actual levels or any of the things that the way that's built, and it currently is on an angle. The only way to mitigate that would be to basically turn the entire front of my house into a parking area for most of the width of the block, which is not desirable either aesthetically or practically or anything, so environmentally. Yeah, by having the independent crossover, we can have a dedicated flat level area, which is then much easier for her to navigate.
Any further questions? Okay, so the officer's recommendations for refusal, there is an alternative recommendation pending if there is support for that. So I'll move the officer's recommendation for refusal to seconder. If there's no seconder, that will lapse. Okay, and Councillor Lorver, you had an alternative recommendation for approval.
Would you like me to move that now?
So if we get it on the screen, please. I presume there'll be a seconder because there wasn't any. Councillor Sullivan. Everybody's read the amendment? Happy to vote? Wish to speak? No. All those in favour of the alternative recommendation for approval? That's unanimous, thank you. So you need to talk to the planning staff tomorrow. Okay, so back to item 3, which is John Street, 16A, strata lot, recommended for approval. Is there a? I'll move the officer's recommendations, seconded by Councillor Lang. Any discussion? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. When this was first presented to us, it did seem rather that the officers were basically indicating to us that there was severe overshadowing, but the way the codes work, there was virtually nothing that we could do about it. And so I asked the question, why is the house so far set back? And basically, there's a requirement, there are streetscape policies and the like are basically suggesting that it needed to be, I think, that far back. But of course, the building's right next door on the left-hand side, almost on the street. And the building on the right-hand side, which is a beautiful old heritage house that we all love in the area, is set well back, but is also separated from this proposal by the driveway, the laneway that runs through into it. And so there was the question of, has the applicant been given an opportunity to think about a reduced setback? And so I wanted, and I know the staff have sort of looked at that between when I asked that question and now as to what their thoughts would be. And so perhaps I can ask the question of staff as to what their feedback is as of this moment, because I think it might be helpful in terms of how we deal with this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question through the chair. If we can throw a diagram up, we have done some initial assessment on this. If the building was to be slid forward, from a heritage perspective, we've been given a green light from our heritage team that would be possible without any detrimental impact to the heritage nature of the street. And the diagram, I'm not sure if that's showing there. It does clearly indicate that the shadow would come further forward and go over the top of the neighbouring building and miss that courtyard, which I think is the critical element. So we were very grateful to get that commentary early in the week. We've had a bit of look at it. We think there is some merit in this. I would suggest we would need to refer it back, and then we would take that on with the applicant and bring it back.
So it would be along the lines of referring it back to the administration to discuss with the applicant reducing the front setback. Would that be acceptable? Would you like to move that, Councillor Sullivan?
If that's the best way to deal with it.
I'm confident that's the best way to do it, yes? Okay. If you'd like to move that, I'll second it. Don't need to speak? No. All happy to vote on, sorry? Yep.
I think it is useful to speak so that officers have a really clear understanding of our reasons for that and can communicate that in terms of what our expectations might be. So certainly the overshadowing of that courtyard deeply troubled me. In a townhouse configuration, I think the windows, that happens, and none of those are to a living room, but the courtyard is clearly an important outdoor living space for that house. So I would expect to see a scheme that either utilise the moving forward of the development to reduce that overshadowing and or looked at whether the back wing of the house was moved further to the east to further improve that amenity. So thank you, Councillor Sullivan, for asking the question, and thank you for the officers for the work you've done, but I'm strongly supportive that that's the outcome we would like to see for those adjoining neighbours.
So the referral doesn't specify the solution, it just asks the officers to talk to the client. So we're all happy with that? Councillor Sullivan?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit of to the thinking that was sort of talked about at the planning at the briefing session, because obviously I didn't really have much of a time to look at the design. But the design also includes a double garage underneath. So what's been shown up on that sketch is the upper story plan. And one of the things that occurred to me was that the middle section of the building, there might be other ways of skinning the cat in a sense, in that it might be possible to, once it's moved forward, to stretch out the upper floor a little bit and particularly hollow out the middle bit. So you can see that it's fairly compact, but I know a lot of the Webb and Brown Eaves designs in the early days used to actually have the middle section of that upper floor sort of hollowed out so that it actually would cast a much less shadow from the middle bit. Now that may or may not help, but it's worth asking the question, and it would be one of those things that would be kind of needs to be done with the neighbour involved, I guess. So it's probably about inviting them to get together and come together with the best solution for the neighbour. Sometimes people want morning sunshine, sometimes people want afternoon sunshine. This will give them some pretty reasonable afternoon sunshine, but maybe they prefer something else, so I don't know. So it's just about saying that moving it forward gives the designers a huge range of design options that could really make a massive difference. It's not just about the design as it is and moving it forward.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, so we're voting on a referral. All those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you. Only writing item is the review of telecommunications policy, item 7. Oh, sorry, item 6, info report. So information report, I move, receive the information report. A seconder, Councillor Graham. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favour? That's unanimous. And finally, item 7, which is a council item anyway, review of telecommunications policy. I'll move the officer's recommendation to approve, to accept. So is this to initiate the review or to accept it? Accept it. So I'll move the officer's recommendation. The seconder, Councillor Groom. Any discussion? It is going to council anyway. Councillor Sullivan. Sorry? You're a second. You're voting. Okay. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. That's finished everything? Yes. So I'll close the meeting at 8 o'clock. Thank you for your attendance and efficient business. Thank you.